We're undoubtedly discussing a very serious issue, and COVID has, in all sorts of unpredictable ways, reached every corner of our society. And nothing I say today minimises the threat of COVID. And indeed, I'm conscious, not having stood in the shoes of those who have suffered from COVID, one needs to be cautious about what one says going forward. But I will, in the course of these remarks, raise some issues about where we are going in tackling this pandemic. But before I get there, I think it is important to say that whereas the Executive understandably makes plaintive pleas to people to do the right thing, and I echo those, we all should act with the utmost responsibility. We should follow the public health guidance. We shouldn't take it lightly. But I think an abiding problem for this Executive in its messaging is typified by the very presentation of this debate today. This motion is moved by a junior minister who himself does not come to this issue with clean hands, so to speak, because when it came to the test of this junior minister on that critical issue of the Executive living by its own laws, this junior minister failed that test, because this junior minister was a participant in the most flagrant breach of those regulations, attending the Storey funeral, at a time when the regulations said that people who were not family, etc., should not even be there. So when, therefore, you bring a debate to a House such as this, hoping that the public are listening and heeding, and the presenter of that debate is one who himself, with his colleagues, thought himself above the very laws that he speaks to, then there is a fundamental credibility problem. And the same applies to the member for Foyle, Miss Anderson, who was very prominent in that flagrant breaching of the law, and who indeed, at or about that time, was tweeting exultantly about wakes and all sorts of things. What sort of example, what sort of leadership has been set? And that, until the day comes when ministers and members who put themselves in that position, unequivocally, with no ways or words, apologise to the public that they exhort to follow the rules, for themselves not following the rules, by attending that funeral, etc. Until that day comes, this Executive is beset with a credibility issue on these regulations. That's the reality. Some might like to duck and dive and pretend otherwise. That is the reality. And maybe it's no surprise that when political leaders set that example, then other organisations, never mind individuals, think that they too can be above the law. And we've seen that with some of the GAA gatherings, which Mrs Cameron referred to, where for 3 successive Sundays we saw breaches of the social distancing and all of that. Yesterday we had a statement from the GAA acknowledging difficulties, saying they were going to cancel club matches, but they haven't cancelled inter-county matches. And if what I read today is correct, then it's still anticipated that up to 400 people can be at matches such as that. So organisations too have the obligation to give leadership, and I do question if it has been there with the depth and sincerity that it needs to be. But the question I have to ask about all these regulations is, where are we going with them? Is all the action we are taking about delaying COVID? Or is it about defeating COVID? And if it's about defeating COVID, then should there not be a role amongst the fit and the healthy to allow immunity to grow? Because if every time the virus raises its ugly head, our response is shut things down, then how do we ever get off this roundabout? How do we ever get to the point, unless the virus obliges us by dying out, or unless a vaccine is found, which seems some way off, then we are, by this course of action, constantly saying the only answer we have is when the virus rises, we close down. Now, is that the sum and substance of the strategy? Because some other countries, there's been much reference to Sweden, have maybe shown that there is another way, that immunity, now it's disparagingly called herd immunity, but community immunity amongst the fit and the healthy may be an approach that's going to have to be considered. Because I do not see how, bearing in mind the economic consequences and the mental health consequences, how we go on indefinitely simply repeating the same answer, which isn't an answer. So I do question, where are we going in terms of our approach to this? What is the strategy? Do we not need to get to the point where we very severely ring-fence those who evidently are vulnerable, but allow the rest of society to largely get on with their lives in the expectation and hope that that will create rising community immunity? But this attitude that, oh, there's a rise in the number of cases, not a great rise in the number of deaths, happily, not a great rise in the number of intensive care patients, happily, but a big rise in the number of cases. So our proportionality is restrictions proportionate to the number of cases, not to the number of deaths. And then we say, so we must be severe in our clampdown. As the cases rise, we must come down on the community in their movements. And never, by that strategy, create an exit strategy for how we're going to get out of this situation. So I do say to the executive, I think there has to be a bit wider thinking on this, about where exactly we are going. Now, there will be mistakes made. That's an inevitability in handling something like this. And you do need a safety net and a capacity to quickly probably take counter measures. But I think there needs to be in mind a strategy which is more than let's just keep reacting to the rise in the number of cases. Because if we keep doing that, Mr. Principal Deputy Speaker, when are we ever going to get out of this? That's my question.